As a student, we experience a multitude of influences throughout our lives. We are exposed to both positive and negative influences that shape us into the person we become in the future. As you can see in the chart from the National Center of Education Statistics, the percentage of high school students who said was the most influential on their thinking about education after high school. This was highest among family members. This compared to a student's influence who was themselves is about a 15% difference, showing that outside influence is a lot greater of an impact than one's self-influence. Which leads me to the question, since 2000, to what extent has different societal influences experienced by high school students ages 14 to 18 negatively affect their potential career paths in the United States? Good morning, my name is Brooke Harrimans. My argument is that different societal influences, such as a student's current socioeconomic status, parental influence, and peer influence, are experienced by high school students ages 14 to 18 and negatively affect their potential career paths in the United States. A student's current socioeconomic status is most influential in everyday life and what most students face. It is something they don't have complete control over, so it impacts their decisions and choices in a more forceful way. According to the American Psychological Association, those from higher social class backgrounds tend to be more successful in developing career aspirations and are generally prepared for the world of work because of access to resources such as career office, guidance counselors, better schools, high-level social actors, and familial experience with higher education. Therefore, those students who don't have access to those things are put at a disadvantage and aren't able to achieve success because they don't have the support that those students in higher social classes attain. Building on this graph from the American Psychological Association also shows us that when a family's income range is in the positive range, ranging from $100,000 to $400,000, that their course difficulty increases. Therefore, they have the more aid to do well, so they have more success. However, as those students' income lower ranges to the negative value, the course difficulty decreases, showing that they aren't able to keep up with the work because they can't afford the necessary help. Therefore, without those challenging courses, they're set back in development because they aren't exposed to those higher level thinking classes. Furthermore, quote approved by Dr. Terry Reed says that the environments to which children are exposed play a crucial role in their academic potential. Goddard indicated that the academic success of individuals is directly related to their own personal characteristics. In deeper meaning, this quote means that how a student grows up to be is based on how they are as a person. This ties back into socioeconomic status because the students who live in less fortunate environments aren't as open-minded to the harder classes, which would be beneficial to them. So they limit their exposure to get the knowledge they may need to have a successful career. This diagram helps to show the effects of a student's current socioeconomic status and their exposure to future development. Those students with a high socioeconomic class have a low risk of exposure to negative stressors and a low risk of poor and physical mental health. Therefore, they have the results of a higher education and occupation. In contrast, those students with a low socioeconomic status have a higher risk to exposure to negative stressors and a higher risk of poor and mental development. Therefore, they have low education and occupation, which puts them behind these other high economic status students. Parental influence is experienced by most students and often one of the most impactful influences that they can't avoid. It is an influence that students despise most because with it, they are becoming who their parents want them to be rather than who they want to be. As shown in this graph from the Dwight Scholar College of Education from Ashland University, parental influence is overall highest when it comes to who influence students to take AP classes, which are rigorous and time-consuming classes. We can see that when we look at the totals, the influence of parents was a total of 168, which suggests that these students were inclined in taking these classes on their own, rather pressured by their parents to take them, even if they weren't prepared to. Comparing this to the other totals, it is the highest and by a significant amount. This quote from a study from the Kansas State University said that the results of Odo's study indicated that many of these youth not only agreed with their parents' viewpoints on careers and goals, 81% feel that they are similar, but their parents were in the primary source of career-related information. This further supports the idea that 81% of these students, which from this specific study is a significant amount, often do whatever their parents say, meaning that they're becoming the person that their parents want them to be rather than who they are best suited to become growing up. According to a survey that was conducted on 810 working people, we can see that the ages that parents started to influence their children was highest between 10 to 15 and 16 and older, meaning that at the beginning of high school and during high school, parent influence was claimed to be the highest on these students, and based on the classes they take and what they do with their life. A closer look at the previous chart, this is a more in-depth vision on the level of influence that these students claim to have due to their parents. At almost 50%, we can see that parental influence on their students was very strong. Over to the side, we can also see that as the generations moved on, the topic of strong influence has increased from 45.7% to 52.1% throughout the generations, showing that there's been an increase in parent influence throughout the years, and individualism has been decreasing because students have less of a say on what they want to do. Peer influence also plays a major role in everyday life. Daily at school, students are comparing test scores to each other and who is smarter and who has the better grades. These small comparisons make a big difference when it comes to how students think of themselves and the decisions they make because of it. According to the College Board stimulus, Doe stated that prevailing conceptions of adolescence suggest conformity is monolithic and unidimensional, such that youth will be excessively susceptible, particularly to negative influences from their peers. This quote explains that young students, like ones in high school, are most vulnerable to the negative influences around them. If one of their peers makes them seem like less of a person for taking lower classes, they're often subjected to change their mind and put aside what is in their best influence for their career development. This chart helps us show the comparison of private decision to public decision. When it comes to non-honors classes, the private decision rates are a lot higher because students aren't worried about what others think of them and are more freely to take classes that are best suited for them. However, when you look at the honors classes, the public decision rate is almost at 100%, showing that these students want others to know they are taking harder level classes and aren't seen as less of a person. The solutions that I have concluded are the following. Schools have career fairs for their students and prevent them with opportunities to explore different career paths. And schools will implement programs with additional aid for these students who may not be in the position to afford other outside resources to support them. The limitations that present themselves with these solutions are that due to the low economic areas, some businesses might not want to be involved with helping these students as a risk for their business. And finally, the other limitation that schools are not able to afford these additional programs and don't have the funding to aid for these students. Thank you. Any questions?
I do have 2 questions for you. First question, how valid and reliable are the sources that you use, and then how do you know they were?
The sources that I use, I think are reliable because I relied on a bunch of studies and dissertations to base my information out of that came from students who had firsthand studies with specific students in high school that got their information on what they have every day and the influences that they feel like put them in the position that they are today. So I feel like my information is reliable because it's based on a bunch of firsthand studies that come directly from these students that face these influences.
Okay, and what might be a real-world implication of what you have found out with this research?
I feel like when it comes to certain people, they have different futures based on how they grow up. So I feel like a real life implication would be like if their parents have grown up to push them to take harder classes, they often have a higher job in the future that pays more and have a better future, but they may have stress and they may end up not fulfilling that career path and then be left with a blank because they don't know what to do because they weren't prepared in what might be a failure because they only grew up based on what their parents told them to do and not what they think would be best in their best interest and what they would have most success in.